Hello, friends. You all know about the early retirees movement, which has gained many supporters and opponents in recent years. Young people put aside an extremely large share of their income from the very beginning of their working life, so that by the age of 35 to 40 they can stop working and retire early, traveling, pursuing hobbies, and paying attention to their loved ones. Some consider this a stupid misconception, others, a dream. Today I would like to discuss this topic with you from different angles. How to set financial goals correctly. What is early retirement for the human psyche, for a sense of happiness? Do you need it at all? Looking ahead, I will say right away that it is needed, but not for all people. Let's look at some psychological traps that may await you on this path. So, in my old videos on this channel, I have repeatedly touched on the topic of accumulating money and capital, talked about the rational rate of savings, about the principle of proportionality. To put it simply, if you earn millions, but eat only instant pasta every day and limit yourself in everything, then you are, to put it mildly, a stupid person. But the other extreme, if you are a spendthrift and spend absolutely everything you earn without a trace, then this usually does not lead to anything good either. Therefore, as always, the golden mean is important. As in any business, the principle of proportionality is key. Unfortunately, people with a low level of financial literacy and education do not always know how to observe this principle of proportionality of expenses and income. For example, buying a car for personal use that costs more than half a year's income is considered wasteful in the understanding of the Western capitalist model. But in the countries of the so-called young capitalism, in developing countries, we see such examples of people's behavior very often. You saved up for a new expensive car, but at the same time you are in debt and have a modest monthly salary. According to the principle of proportionality, a person should not spend more than half a year's income on transportation, on travel. Even one annual salary is too much to spend only on transportation. Loans and installments often disguise such wastefulness, as if spreading it in a thin layer, distributing expenses over time. And it begins to seem that the expenses are justified and proportionate to income. But this is not so, it is often an illusion. When income and expenses are distributed evenly, then absolutely anyone can painlessly invest at least 10% of their income, even people with an initially small salary. This is the so-called financial hygiene. Like brushing your teeth in the morning or taking a shower regularly. Is 10% enough to retire early? Of course not. It may provide you with some safety net, give you self-confidence. But to save for an early retirement, you need to have a much higher savings rate, from 40 to 50% and higher. And not everyone can afford this. Due to purely psychological nuances or based on the nominal salary. The principle is simple: the higher the income, the greater the share a person can theoretically send to investments, so that on the one hand, his basic needs are covered, but the principle of harmony in personal life and family relationships is observed. If your partner, your family, your loved ones and relatives do not share your views, are not your like-minded people, then experiments with early retirement will most likely not lead to anything good. There will be quarrels, disruptions in relationships in society. Life is a much more complex and multifaceted phenomenon than economic textbooks write and an early retirement advocates try to present. There are many variables, in addition to the savings rate. People's life situations can be different. But the only criterion can be a person's happiness, his harmonious life that brings satisfaction, harmony with society. If you are comfortable, for example, investing 80% of your income, then please. If you are uncomfortable, then you should not go to all lengths, poisoning your life and the lives of those around you. There can be no dogmas or strict rules in these matters. 10%, please. This is a kind of hygienic level of any civilized person. If more, then only at will and with caution, keeping an eye on your feelings. What psychological tricks, excuses can be used in psychotherapy? For example, calling it buying your financial independence and freedom. People who belong to the early retirees movement think something like this: I received income for a month, invested 50%, which means I bought myself another extra month of freedom, i.e. a month of spending while unemployed. Taking into account the investment multiplier and compound interest, the amount of time purchased will constantly grow. The higher the savings rate, the more conventional months of freedom a person buys for himself. Freedom and lack of freedom are also purely philosophical concepts, not scientific ones. In the investor's understanding, this is an opportunity not to go to work, to belong only to yourself, to do only what you want and when you want. For people with a workaholic mentality, this is real torture. Such people usually have no hobbies, they do not know what to do in their free time. In a word, they are also a rather psychologically unstable type of personality and character. The value of work for such people is replaced by the value of socialization. Work is life itself, in the understanding of such people. They are simply unable to get socialization outside of work. Usually this coexists with low self-esteem, psychological problems. The paradigm of going to work and getting up every morning to the alarm clock is not just a ritual, but also turns into the meaning of life for some. This is why the early retirees movement is not suitable for many people. It causes misunderstanding and even irritation. In addition, biological mechanisms are involved. Why do many people, many men after 40 to 50 years begin to fall into depression, commit crazy acts? The answer is simple. It is programmed this way by evolution and our biological rhythms. The human psyche, an animal belonging to the species Homo sapiens, is designed in such a way that we constantly have to do something, prove to others and to ourselves that we are needed for something. This evolutionary mechanism was invented in order, to put it simply, to free up territory. After we have fulfilled our reproductive function, gave birth to and raised children, after 40 years comes the so-called midlife crisis, a psychologically dangerous period. We want to feel in demand, socialized. And we seem to constantly ask ourselves the same question: why am I here, why should I live on? The biological mission, procreation, offspring, has already been accomplished. And then what? And our brain begins to send us special signals, side effects of lack of employment. That is why many men at 40 try to restart the biological program, leave their wife and find a young lover, a new passion, to go through this biological path again. Or they simply go into drunkenness, self-destruction, experience severe depression. Why am I here, in this world? Well, go clear the space, make room for the young. Approximately the same thing happens when you retire early. Severe depression, you don't need to go to work anymore. But the need to be useful to society has not disappeared. And here it is very important to find an activity, a hobby that you enjoy and at the same time will provide this feeling of being in demand, needed by your family, people, society. A psychological trap tied to biology and evolution, which almost everyone who retires early falls into. And not only early. Bugs in our consciousness do not allow us to psychologically enjoy freedom, to become liberated, open to the world people. Psychotherapy in such situations is not always effective, such a strong depression can await. Especially in closed countries, unfree, with a collectivist consciousness, where we were brought up in the spirit of collectivism, values are formed somewhat differently in the value of freedom. Free time does not play such a dominant role. Can a person who is not free be happy? This is a question for psychologists. I think he can. Man is basically created for happiness, like a bird for flight. He adapts to life in any conditions and, of course, can feel happy even in conditions of relative lack of freedom. We hear from older people, he was happy while he was working, but as soon as he retired, he became sad. Even in prison, as psychologists say, some people can feel happy. In their own way, but happy. This moment, in my opinion, is very clearly demonstrated in the cult film, The Shawshank Redemption. Remember, Brooks, when he got out of prison, could not adapt to ordinary life, outside prison, where he was truly happy, where he was in demand and needed. This is an elderly prisoner who sheltered a crow chick. In the end, it all ended with Brooks hanging himself, unable to bear the depression, unable to bear the maladjustment caused by a peaceful and free life. Red, the hero played by Morgan Freeman, later experienced the same thing after leaving prison. For the same reason, many people who have experienced psychological violence, have become victims of aggression, restrictions on freedom, and even feel some gratitude to their rapist. This phenomenon in psychology is known to everyone as Stockholm Syndrome. Paradoxically, the victim justifies his rapist. The reasons also lie in the neurobiology of our brain, in the evolutionary attitudes that were laid down in us by nature. I repeat, the issue of psychological discomfort when retiring early is rather a philosophical issue, lying in the plane of human philosophy and psychology, human life. How to deal with this? Find activities in retirement that will engage you in communication and create some benefit for society. Write books, memoirs, engage in educational activities, hobbies or blog on social networks. Anything that will deceive our brain, our evolutionary and biological attitudes of self-destruction, will create some illusion that we are still needed by nature, needed by society and other people. Unfortunately, there is no other way. Work in retirement is still needed, it is simply vital to our psyche. What is the fundamental difference between compulsory work and voluntary work? You cannot refuse work at any time. I know many people who tried to turn their favorite hobby into work. And many, strangely enough, did not succeed. For example, a girl loved to make interesting toys from beads in her free time. But when she did it at the behest of her soul, in her free time, it was one story. But when she got a job and registered as a craftswoman, when some plans, obligations, orders appeared. For some reason, all this stopped bringing as much pleasure as it did when she was a hobby. Therefore, there is a big difference between voluntary work in retirement and mandatory work for which your employer pays you money. You can happily grow vegetables in your garden in retirement. Is this work? Of course, work that brings a pleasant feeling of fatigue, a feeling of being needed, of benefit to your family. But this is not work, not hired work. Therefore, you should not convince yourself that early retirement is bad and you should not strive for financial independence, saying that this is a syndrome of deferred life, as some psychologists suggest. This is not true, or only partly true. Early retirement, freedom and independence from obligations is a wonderful phenomenon, a healthy one, which, with the right approach, can make your life happier. If you closely communicate with representatives of the FIRE movement, you will be surprised to discover that their units of measurement are not dollars, euros or yen. They measure everything only in time, months of free life on their future conditional pension. For example, before buying a car for $20,000, such people will weigh all the pros and cons. Is 2 years of my time, my life worth the benefits, the potential benefit that I will receive if I buy this car? If it's worth it, then, of course, you need to buy it. If a person values time and life higher, then he will rather refuse such a purchase, find some kind of compromise. If you close your eyes and imagine that you are conditionally put in prison for 2 years and forced to work for 2 years without a salary, you, like a squirrel in a wheel, will get up at 7 a.m. and work in vain for these 2 years, then the choice of buying a car no longer seems so obvious. But people usually reason like this: well, I worked honestly, saved this money. Do I have the right to spend it, to pamper myself? Of course, you have the right. It all depends on the questions that you ask yourself, how you formulate your goals and objectives. What are your values? It's not for nothing that they say, this person has a bourgeois soul and mundane values, he does not do charity, does not think about the spiritual, about time, about global things, about the value of health, for example, but spends everything only on himself, on his consumption. Bourgeois habits: to have an expensive car, a luxurious house, certainly with an expensive renovation, with neoclassical columns and a golden toilet in the bathroom. Bourgeois habits. Truly rich people, for example, Elon Musk, think more about global problems. About the conquest of space, about people not suffering, not dying in wars. He lives in a modest prefabricated house not far from his office or even sleeps on a pull-out sofa, wears simple but comfortable t-shirts. Everything depends on a person's values, on setting goals, on his worldview. A reasonable person who begins to think about time, the first thing he usually does is open a simple table in the Excel program and write down his income and expenses. Why do family and friends often become the main obstacle to investments, to the implementation of the idea of living with capital? Any person who gets excited about the idea of investing 50% or more of their income will inevitably face the need to have like-minded people from their social circle, from their environment. And the first thing that such a person's wife usually says when discussing this topic at a family council is, "Are you stupid? What country do you live in? They will take everything away from you, you decided to save up these candy wrappers. In our country, you can't save anything." Not only your loved ones, but also your friends will tell you the same thing. How is it possible to voluntarily exchange the money you earn today for future financial independence? Buy not a new BMW, but, for example, a budget Toyota Corolla. It is very difficult to explain to loved ones if they do not want to understand anything, do not want to save. That is exactly why this is definitely not suitable for everyone. Several favorable circumstances must come together at the same time. A like-minded wife or husband who understands the mechanism, understands the value of time, understands the transparency of the instrumentation. Otherwise, you shouldn't even start such a thing. Women usually understand tangible values, material ones. For example, apartments, real estate investments. It is very difficult to explain and convince them of the need to invest in the stock market, buy index funds, bonds, some promissory notes. Especially during the so-called nesting period, when your wife is pregnant, you and the whole family are waiting for the birth of a child. During this period, women are especially inclined to do repairs, start buying real estate. But when a woman is smart and she herself can come and touch the walls of the house with her fingers or go into the apartment, she herself understands the value and mechanics of the investments that you offer her. In this case, there will most likely be no objections from her. Often when you say, "My wife does not support me and does not understand me," you simply do not know how to talk to loved ones, do not know how to explain and compromise. And that's the whole problem. Is your spouse so stupid that she doesn't understand the value of time and free time? Does she want to work all her life and doesn't value freedom? No, that's not true. You probably just offered her something wrong. Not the types of investments that she understands. She can't comprehend cryptocurrencies and securities. She is skeptical about any type of investment in promissory notes. Then your task is to choose exactly what will cause her approval and complete understanding. Explaining the mechanics of accumulating an additional pension is sometimes a difficult task, but still a real one. Without social approval, alone, it will be very difficult for you. Leaving a family, getting divorced or making any hasty decisions is stupid, it is always the most extreme measure. People do this only in the case of diametrically opposed views on life, in all directions, from raising children to moral and ethical attitudes. If there is no love, if there is nothing in common, then yes, sometimes a divorce can be a solution to the problem. But more often, no. A complete stranger, dishonest, this is something that has nothing to do with financial behavior. By the way, this channel had a useful video on this topic, which is called, How to Recognize a Decent Person. It gives very specific criteria by which you need to look for a husband, a wife. And not only a life partner, but also friends, just people with whom you will communicate. And the principle of decency, as strange as it may seem, is key. How to recognize a decent person, by what markers? I will leave a link to that video in the tips, be sure to watch. So, the key idea is the idea of anti-consumption. What many come to, but unfortunately, often slide into extremes. And this topic should be considered from the position of closing basic needs, Realizing the Pyramid of Values, Abraham Maslow, and the philosophy of the so-called Scandinavian way of life. If you understand what the Swedish language calls the concept lagom, enough, it will be much easier for you. Lagom is moderation in everything. You need exactly as much as you need, no more and no less. There are many analogues of the concept lagom in other European languages. A lifestyle that implies moderation, rationality, sufficiency. The second idea that I try to convey in all my videos on this channel concerns the ways of obtaining capital. Capital can be honestly earned exclusively by your own labor by creating value for people. It is almost impossible to earn capital on the stock market or with the help of any other investment instrument. All this is done for preservation, not for earning money. To transfer the purchasing power of money to yourself in the future. Nothing more. A mistake when people have inflated expectations from investments. Beating inflation, even by a few percent, is already a very good result. Remember that the higher the return, the higher the risks will be. This is an unchangeable formula for capital accumulation. The body of capital itself is made exclusively through active actions, through the implementation of one's knowledge, skills, and abilities. If we exclude receiving an inheritance from rich relatives or receiving capital from marriage, then only by creating goods and services, can you earn capital. Time, rational consumption, and regular investments. That's it, nothing else is needed. And luck, of course. To be in the right place at the right time. That's how nature and human life itself work, no matter how unfair it often seems to us. But, unfortunately, it seems to me that 80 to 90% of all those listening to the videos on this channel, despite the fact that they have heard this idea many times, still do not fully comprehend it. And they continue to wonder what stock to buy, what to invest in. They don't understand that this is absolutely not something worth being interested in. Capital is formed outside the stock exchange, not on it. Regularity is important, the savings rate is important, and time is important. Everything else is not important. Whether you look for specific stocks or buy indices, for example, the S&P 500, this is completely unimportant. It is important to learn to beat inflation. Sooner or later, if you maintain regular investments over a long period of time, you will still get rich. Whether you buy stocks, bonds, gold, or use bank deposits, the result over the long term will still be approximately the same, you will still get rich. But, apparently, until they make many of their own mistakes, many people find it very difficult to understand this wisdom. They will still ask, what exactly should I invest my money in? Imagine that capital is a multitude of postal parcels that you are trying to send through different postal services to yourself in the future. In your country, for example, there are 5 to 6 postal services. So, distribute. Yes, with any of these services it may happen that the goods get lost and do not arrive. They may arrive crumpled or damaged. Everything is the same as with investments. These are risks, but the main thing is that with a high degree of probability, if you sent the parcel today, if you wrote the postal code and address correctly, then in some time the parcel will arrive. In almost 99.9% of cases it will definitely arrive. It will not arrive with 100% probability only in one case, if you do not send it at all. Exactly the same analogy with investments. There are deposits, there are shares, bonds, government and corporate, there is residential real estate, there is commercial real estate, there are precious metals and several other types of investment instruments, both more risky, with a slightly higher return, and less risky. So, put your parcels for yourself in the future in different such boxes. And they will definitely arrive, or at least the lion's share of the parcels will definitely arrive. Of course, it is better to study which post office has more attentive employees, what kind of vehicles they use to transport these parcels, how quickly they will be delivered, what the conditions are. But getting too hung up on this, to the detriment of your main work, accumulation of capital, this is a big mistake. They will still send you only what you put into these parcels, nothing more. Do not count on easy money. And this is the wisdom that I share absolutely openly and sincerely. Ask yourself only the right questions. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye, until we meet again.